Chapter 131. You know my temper. I don't care if she offends me. Even if it's for your sake, I won't care too much about it. But she actually dared to mess with my wife. Yen Chue was still leaning lazily in Xiao Qing's arms. His long and narrow eyes were slightly narrowed, and a trace of coldness flashed through them. If it weren't for the fact that he still had to stay in Linchuan's survivor base, he would have already torn Xiao Yu into pieces. Xiao Mo looked helpless. Aren't I here to apologize to you? What's the use of apologizing? Yen Chue glared at him and said sarcastically, how about I kill your sister and apologize to you? Xiao Qing stroked Yen Chue's head very gently. Then, Yen Chue's cheeks turned red. He stuffed himself into Xiao Qing's arms and said shyly, she shouldn't have bullied my wife. This time, for your sake, I'll let bygones be bygones. But if there's a next time, I won't be lenient. Xiao Mo couldn't help but look at Xiao Qing again. He was now really impressed by Xiao Qing. How capable must she be to be able to subdue Yen Chue? Just an apology is too shallow. I found something new, and I'm going to pick it up in 2 days. Madam, you're a wood paranormal, right? I wonder if you've subdued all the mutant plants? Xiao Qing shook her head. There's still one spot left. She had subdued a total of 3 mutant plants, and she could subdue one more. Whether it was the original vine, or the man-eating flower and daughter, they were all inclined towards attacking. Xiao Qing originally wanted to find a plant that could be used as an auxiliary, but she hadn't found a suitable one, so she didn't deliberately look for one. There's a type of mutated plant in the vicinity. The fragrance it emits can make people feel weak all over. The fruits it produces are similar to the pills Qi Yu makes. What I mean is that when we leave in a few days, I'll bring you to subdue it. Consider it my apology. Xiao Mo said with a smile. Yen Chue squeezed Xiao Qing's hand, signaling her to agree. When Xiao Qing agreed, Yen Chue immediately said, I want to go too. No matter what, he couldn't allow Xiao Mo to interact with his wife. He hadn't managed to woo his wife yet. What if Xiao Mo had ulterior motives and laid his hands on his wife? Your body. Xiao Mo furrowed his brows. They had worked together for such a long time, and there was bound to be some camaraderie between them. Moreover, Yen Chue was too important, and he didn't want anything to happen to her. I'll recuperate well. Yen Chue didn't care in the past, but after meeting Xiao Qing, his thoughts completely changed. He wanted to live well and live a little longer so that he could spend more time with Xiao Qing. Moreover, how could he give his wife a sense of security with such a weak body? Therefore, Yen Chue made up his mind to take care of his body. His wife definitely wouldn't like it if he was sick. Then it's decided. Xiao Mo smiled and said, I won't disturb you anymore. Before leaving, I'll send someone to inform you. Yen Chue impatiently waved his hand and chased the helpless Xiao Mo away. After chasing Xiao Mo away, Yen Chue took the ring off his finger and put it on Xiao Qing's finger. Wife, this ring was made by me. You just need to press the switch on the inside, and it can release an electric current to paralyze people. Take it for self-defense. You can wear it. Xiao Qing said and was about to take it off. She felt that she could protect herself, but Yen Chue looked a little more fragile. Yen Chue quickly took out another ring. I made a total of 2 rings. Wear it and don't take it off. Xiao Qing didn't argue anymore. She just helplessly looked at Yen Chue and snickered. Yen Chue was very happy. He used the hand with the ring on his finger to hold Xiao Qing's hand with the ring. Looking at the couple's rings on their fingers, he couldn't help but feel happy. He had lived in a dark corner all his life. He had never felt so warm and bright. Yen Chue especially liked to see Xiao Qing's helpless look. He liked to see her give in for him even if she was helpless. There was a faint doting in her eyes. It was very shallow, but it filled Yen Chue's heart perfectly. His heart, which hadn't throbbed for many years, was touched by her little by little. It was itchy and didn't hurt, but it was much more comfortable than every time he hurt himself. Baby, I want to know your name. Yen Chue looked at Xiao Qing with bright eyes. Xiao Qing hesitated for a moment and then said, Xiao Qing. Xiao as in Feng Xiao, Qing as in amorous. Yan Chue immediately acted like a love-struck fool and said, Baby, your name is as good as you. Well, it sounds good. Xiao Qing felt that he was probably hopeless. Xiao Qing also wanted to keep a distance from him. After all, she had to leave sooner or later. Dai, Little Bun, and Yan Honqing were all waiting for her. It was not good for Yan Chue to fall too deeply. However, every time Yan Chue looked at her pitifully, she couldn't help being nice to him. It was probably because this was a world that looked at appearances. Yan Chue was too good-looking. Even Xiao Qing, who didn't think that she was obsessed with appearances, couldn't help but be nicer to Yan Chue. In the entire base, because of Yan Chue's arrogance, there were many people who had opinions about him. However, there were still some people who couldn't help but want to look at him more, even if they knew that his temper and character were so bad. This was probably the advantage of being good-looking. Can I call you Qing in the future? Yan Chue looked at Xiao Qing expectantly. He wanted to call her more intimately and ambiguously. If possible, he hoped that Xiao Qing could call him more intimately. Yen Yen, Chi Chi, Yu Yu, they were all good choices. However, with Xiao Qing's character, it seemed a little impossible. Xiao Qing's face stiffened. Since he was a patient, she tolerated it. Chapter 132. Probably to show his sincerity, Qiao Mo personally led a team to help Xiao Qing get the mutant plant. Although he didn't bring many people with him, they were all elites. He brought 3 peak level 3 paranormals, and the weakest of the other 5 was at the peak of level 2. Naturally, there were level 4 paranormals in the base, but the place they were going to this time wasn't that dangerous, so they didn't send any level 4 paranormals. Level 4 paranormals were all powerful enough to stand on their own. For a base, they were the top force, and wouldn't be used easily. It was very comfortable to travel with Qiao Mo. His car was a commercial RV, which was very spacious and had a bed. Xiao Qing and Yan Chue occupied the bed. Yan Chue seemed to like lying in Xiao Qing's arms. Even though Qiao Mo and a few other paranormals were beside them, Yan Chue still occupied Xiao Qing's arms openly, without showing any shyness. Those level 3 paranormals all lowered their heads, not daring to look at Yan Chue. They were afraid that they would be killed if they saw something they shouldn't. After all, Yan Chue was famous for his unpredictable temper, and no one wanted to get into trouble with him. Xiao Qing held a crystal. While lying down, she absorbed the crystal's power to heal her body. The Zombie King's crystal contained too much energy. Although most of it was used to heal her body, some of it still went into the crystal nucleus in her head. At first, the impact was great, but gradually, it became lighter. Some of it still flowed into the crystal nucleus, slowly filling it, and some of it went into Xiao Qing's body, healing her internal organs and meridians. Although the healing process was getting slower and slower, she could now exert more than half of her previous strength. However, when she consumed too much of her power, her meridians and internal organs would hurt. Wife, the energy should be more useful than the zombie crystal, right? Yan Chue also knew that Xiao Qing was seriously injured, so he was very distressed. He thought for a moment and then said, "When we get home, I will check the stock. Although there are not many wood crystal nuclei, there are still a few. You can try to absorb them." Among the crowd, the level 3 wood paranormal couldn't help but shrink his head, making himself invisible. He was afraid that Yan Chue would take a fancy to his energy core. "I have an advanced crystal stone in my body, so I can't absorb zombie nuclei that are too high level, let alone alien nuclei. Otherwise, there will be an energy collision, which will aggravate my injury." Xiao Qing touched Yan Chue's head. She suddenly liked this action. Yan Chue's short hair was very soft. It was not as flamboyant as what others said about him. It felt exceptionally good to touch. Qiao Mo couldn't help but raise his eyebrows and ask, "Zombie crystals can be placed inside the body. Could it be that there's a new absorption method? Because my body is different from others. Ordinary people shouldn't try it." Xiao Qing shook her head, and then Yen Qiue hugged her. Yen Qiue looked at Xiao Mo with a dangerous look. His wife was honest, but Xiao Mo was an old fox. What if Xiao Mo found out something? Xiao Mo thought that Yen Qiue was jealous. In the past, Yen Qiue's character was very bad, and he lived recklessly. He was a completely different person from the vinegar jar now. He couldn't help but shake his head, but he also yearned to find a girl he liked. He could share everything with her. It was indeed a good thing to enjoy and be spoiled by someone. With several level 2 paranormals escorting them, Xiao Qing and the others didn't encounter any danger along the way. At noon, they stopped once. Xiao Qing remembered that Yen Qiue had a bad stomach, so she didn't forget to bring him kitchen utensils and ingredients for making soup. She also picked some non-poisonous wild vegetables and mushrooms nearby and made a pot of chicken soup. Chapter 133. As she boiled the soup, she thought that she could make some fresh Cruciancarp next time. Cruciancarp soup was the best for the stomach. Putting aside the taste of the soup, just the aroma alone was enough to make Xiao Mo and the others keep looking over. Yen Qiue didn't want to share Xiao Qing's soup with them at all. She wished she could throw this group of people who were eyeing her covetously. Xiao Mo moved over and stared at the pot of soup. Look at this big pot of soup. You can't finish it alone. Why don't I help you? Yen Qiue sneered. Who says I can't finish it? Then, in front of everyone, he drank the pot of soup that was still hot. He drank it very quickly, afraid that someone would snatch it from him. Finally, he wiped his mouth. I'm done. Xiao Mo glanced at Yen Qiue's protruding belly and silently gave him a thumbs up. He was really too hard-working. Yen Qiue sneered. He would never let Xiao Qing's soup go into someone else's stomach. Absolutely not. You're done? Xiao Qing turned around and saw Yen Qiue's protruding belly sitting there. She could not help but reach out and touch Yen Qiue's belly. It was soft and nice to the touch. Can you still eat? Yen Qiue glanced at the shredded pork with green pepper in Xiao Qing's hand and gritted his teeth. Yes. Xiao Qing could not help but say, if you can't eat, then don't force yourself. There are so many people here anyway. Your stomach is not good, so don't torture it. Yen Qiue gritted his teeth. Who said that? I'm not full yet. Then, he burped. Yen Qiue was a little embarrassed. He could not help but cover his mouth and say, I just drank a little too much soup. Actually, soup is not full. Wait for me. I'll eat it when I come back. Before Yen Qiue left, he glared fiercely at Xiao Mo, especially protective of his food. Xiao Mo touched the bridge of his nose helplessly. He had known Yen Qiue for a long time, but he had never seen such a childish side of him. Yen Qiue went to pee, and then came back valiantly to fight again. In the end, she ate all the food made by Xiao Qing and lay in Xiao Qing's arms, crying. Xiao Qing had no choice but to rub his tummy. She sighed and said, Do you know pain now? Yen Qiue's eyes were red, but she was still stubborn. It doesn't hurt. Xiao Qing had no choice but to rub his stomach with a sigh. The other paranormals who were watching them were stunned. Was this Yen Qiue? They must not have woken up yet. Or maybe Yen Qiue was possessed by something. This scene was simply unscientific. When it was time for dinner and breakfast, Xiao Qing didn't dare to cook too much. She only cooked a little according to Yen Qiue's perverted appetite. She ate very little herself. Anyway, she would vomit it out anyway. When they arrived at the place, several paranormals automatically formed a formation, surrounding Xiao Qing and the other two in the middle. They cooperated very well and walked forward. They were in a jungle. The thing Xiao Mo was looking for was related to Yen Qiue. Yen Qiue was developing a potion that could temporarily replace crystal stones and quickly restore people's superpowers. It was just like the small blue potion bottle in the online game. The missing material could be found in the potion. There were naturally no zombies in the jungle, but there were a large number of mutant plants and animals. It was even more dangerous than the zombie-filled city. After all, mutant plants and animals were more lethal than zombies, especially mutant animals. They were often very flexible, and their strength and speed were much stronger than ordinary zombies. With the help of mutant plants, the jungle was also very dangerous. Chapter 134. As soon as they entered the forest, they encountered two mutant animals. One of them looked like a wild dog and was very fast, while the other looked like a wild boar and had very strong defense and strength. Fortunately, Chow Mo's team often cooperated with each other, so it didn't take them much effort to deal with the two mutant animals. However, they still encountered some trouble along the way. There was a kind of tree. Although they didn't know what its original species was, after mutation, its vines would bind people and drag them to the trunk. The branches and leaves of the tree would secrete a kind of drowsy fragrance. When people fell asleep and lost the ability to struggle, they would be dragged all the way to the tree. The tree had sharp thorns. After piercing into a person's body, it would be like the venom secreted by Shao Qing's vines, corroding the insides of the person's body until only the body was left, and then slowly absorbed. There were also a lot of small mutant animals living near the tree. They would help the tree attract and kill humans and large animals, and then part of their limbs would be used to fill their stomachs. It was a mutually beneficial relationship. Shao Qing and the others had almost been tricked by this kind of tree. Fortunately, Shao Qing, as a wood ability user, had discovered that something was wrong in time. She hadn't been able to absorb the tree's fragrance and had been caught in one fell swoop. They also wiped out the mutant animals near the tree. Mutant animals had nuclei similar to zombies in their brains, so did mutant plants, but they didn't know where they were. In addition to harvesting a lot of nuclei, Yen Qiue also extracted some toxins and sap from the tree. He probably wanted to go back and do some research. Sure enough, there's everything in the forest. A paranormal breathed a sigh of relief, then said, "I've really learned something today. Thanks to sister-in-law's alertness, otherwise we wouldn't have found it." Chow Mo expressed his goodwill to Shao Qing, and then Yen Qiue was flattered by the word sister-in-law. He didn't care that Chow Mo called himself brother and took advantage of him. Chow Mo noticed this. Whenever it was related to Shao Qing, Chow Mo would definitely lose his mind, and become a completely different person from the usual Yen Qiue. More importantly, as long as Chow Mo praised Yen Qiue and Shao Qing's relationship, he could definitely appease Yen Qiue. He had obtained a very useful new skill. There is indeed everything in the jungle. What kind of weather is this? There are so many mosquitoes. Another paranormal said as he waved his hand to drive away the mosquitoes that were a size larger than normal mosquitoes. He couldn't help but feel envious. Those mosquitoes didn't bite Shao Qing at all. Moreover, they stayed far away from them. As for the few of them, they were especially attractive to mosquitoes. The mosquitoes were all circling around them. Could it be that even mosquitoes looked at faces now? Or could it be that mosquitoes didn't look at faces, but gender? There's something wrong. Yen Qiue couldn't help but frown. He stretched out his hand and clenched his fist in the air. A mosquito closest to him suddenly froze in mid-air, allowing everyone to see what the mosquito looked like. This mosquito was a lot bigger than ordinary mosquitoes. Its mouth was sharp and long, looking like a thick and long steel needle. It was already more than half the length of the mosquito's body. There were also spots on its wings, looking particularly strange. "Has anyone been bitten?" Yen Qiue asked calmly. Immediately, someone raised his hand. "I was bitten. It's on the back of my hand." As soon as he stretched out his hand, he was stunned. There was a big red and swollen bump on his hand, and pus kept flowing out. The key was that he didn't notice it at all. Such a big bump, under normal circumstances, he would definitely have noticed it. He wouldn't have only noticed it when his flesh was rotten. Chapter 135. More importantly, he had just been bitten. How did the back of his hand become like this? The man was very panicked, and the others also hurriedly looked at the places where they had been bitten. As they expected, when they weren't paying attention, the places where they had been bitten all had big blisters. The blisters looked terrible, but they didn't feel it at all. If Yen Qiue hadn't asked, they wouldn't have even found out that the places where they had been bitten had become like this. The other two paranormals who hadn't been bitten hurriedly used their powers to clean up the mosquitoes that were still circling around and refused to leave. One of them was a fire paranormal. As soon as they took action, the mosquitoes flew away very cleverly. As for the rest, they were busy studying the bites. The places where they had been bitten all looked like they had been infected. Pus and blood kept flowing out, and big blisters were bulging. Some places had even begun to rot. One of the paranormals took out a dagger and directly cut off the bulging blisters. However, wherever the pus and blood touched, it began to rot. He had to cut off the rotten flesh with pus and blood. In the end, the blister was only the size of a chestnut, but a large piece of flesh was cut off. Seeing that it was so effective, the other paranormals began to follow suit. Some of them had wounds on their necks and backs, so they had to ask others to help them. In the end, all of them were injured. These mosquitoes seem to be afraid of fire. If they get any closer, the fire paranormals will expel them. There are dangers everywhere in the jungle. Don't take it lightly. Qiao Mo's tone was also a little low. They had fought against large mutant animals, but in the end, they had been defeated by mutant mosquitoes. They had learned from their mistakes. They didn't dare to underestimate all the animals and plants in the jungle anymore. God knew if a blade of grass near their feet had the ability to kill people. What if it did? Even mosquitoes could make them suffer such a big loss. How could they not be careful? Yen Qiue silently put the mosquito he controlled into the bottle and prepared to take it back for research. Xiao Qing couldn't help but look at the bottle. Although she knew it was safe, she still had the urge to pinch the mosquito inside. Yen Qiue misunderstood. He thought that Xiao Qing was curious about his strength, so he quickly said, "My ability is different. I can control the air. I can compress the air and form an air bomb. I can also draw a vacuum in an instant, but it consumes a lot of my ability." Xiao Qing nodded. This ability was indeed very useful. Whether it was during normal times or during a fight, especially during normal times, it should be particularly effective to preserve some food. If those vegetables and fruits were stored in a vacuum, they should be able to be stored for a long time, right? Yen Qiue had no idea that Xiao Qing had already begun to think about the daily use of his supernatural ability, such as preserving food. Even if she knew, Yen Qiue would only be very happy. After all, in his wife's heart, he was still quite useful. Thinking about it made him very happy. We'll be close to our destination if we go further. Everyone, be careful. We're now deep in the jungle. The deeper we go, the more dangerous it will be. Just like before, a small mosquito could cause so much harm, let alone other animals. Everyone, don't let your guard down, Qiao Mo said very calmly. Everyone nodded. After walking for a while with heightened vigilance, they came out of the grass that was half a person's height and saw a sea of flowers. Clumps of unknown big red flowers bloomed particularly enchantingly. This sea of flowers should have grown naturally. It looked very irregular, but because it grew very densely, only clumps and clusters of flowers could be seen. The heavy flowers pressed down on the stems and squeezed together, and then emitted a sweet and greasy fragrance. This made the ability users who had been tricked countless times before become vigilant and hold their breaths. In their hearts, anything with a fragrance was equivalent to poison. One of the ability users even directly said to Qiao Mo, "Why don't we take a detour?" They were really afraid of being tricked. If there was poison, such a large sea of flowers might hide some strange things in it. How could they walk out of it? "Yeah, let's take a detour. It's better to be vigilant than to be tricked," the other ability users echoed. "Wait a moment. I'll collect some of their pollen and go back to study it." Looking at the sea of flowers, Yen Qiue's eyes lit up. He couldn't help but take a step forward. Then, he was stopped by Xiao Qing. Xiao Qing stretched out her finger and released an emerald green vine without any thorns. It looked fresh and cute. The vine wriggled out and came into contact with a large, bright red flower. The emerald green vine was immediately dyed pink. Soon, half of the vine was red. When Xiao Qing took the vine back, she asked Yen Chue to find a bottle. She put the vine in the bottle, and the vine immediately spat out a lot of red juice. The juice was absorbed by the vine and came from the stamen of the big flower. If there was poison, this should be the most poisonous part. It was just right for Yen Chue to study. My wife really loves me. My wife really loves me. My heart is warm. These words kept flooding Yen Chue's mind. Then, he looked up shyly and saw Xiao Qing's pale face with a touch of faint red. Was his wife shy as well? He had never seen his wife shy before. It's not poison. Xiao Qing couldn't help but press her temples. Those vines were formed by her energy. When she took them back, a little juice accidentally returned to her body with the energy. Now, she felt a little hot. Chapter 136. Yen Chue's eyes lit up like light bulbs. He leaned forward shyly and said, "Is it that kind of heat? Qing, don't be afraid. I'm here. We can solve it behind the bushes." "What are you thinking about?" Xiao Qing glanced at Yen Chue, then closed her eyes and savored it carefully. It has an exciting effect, and also a little stimulating effect. The circulation of power and blood flow are much faster. It's a good thing, but I don't know if there are any side effects. Yen Chue was very disappointed. He thought that he could eat meat today. After the disappointment, he cheered up and asked Xiao Mo, "Can we collect more and take it back?" Naturally, Xiao Mo heard Xiao Qing's words. The side effects of stimulating one's lust were nothing. If he could create something even more effective than the invincible little pill, that would be his greatest gain this time. He waved his hand, and immediately several superpowered people came forward with bottles and cans to collect the liquid in the flowers. Xiao Qing told them to put on transparent gloves to prevent them from touching the liquid. After all, Xiao Qing was a zombie. For her, it was only a little stimulating, but for these superpowered people, a few paranormals had just walked to the flowering shrubs and were about to collect the liquid when Xiao Qing suddenly heard a faint rustling sound. Before she could warn them, she saw a greenish-black shadow soar into the sky with falling petals. When it came back down, they could see a bloody mouth. It was a giant python as thick as a bucket. It swallowed an unsuspecting superpowered person in one bite. Xiao Qing and the others even saw a human figure slide down its body and finally become a bulge in its abdomen. Soon, the bulge would be digested. After all, the digestive ability of mutant animals was a lot stronger. The other superpowered people were shocked. After they reacted, they used their own abilities, probably wanting to kill the python and save the unlucky one in its belly. However, the python's scales were unexpectedly strong. Whether it was fireballs or earth thorns, they didn't even leave a white mark on the python's body. The python was very smart. It knew how to hit the target with one strike and escape thousands of miles away. It didn't want to stay at all. Xiao Qing glanced at Xiao Mo. He had no intention of making a move, so he decided to help the metahumans instead. Vines soared into the sky, twisting many of the blooming flowers into pieces before tying up the python. Pythons were slippery and slippery, so ordinary vines would definitely not be able to bind them. However, Xiao Qing's vines were equipped with particularly sharp thorns. The moment the thorns were bound by the vines, they fiercely pierced into the python's flesh. The superpowered people attacked the python for a long time, but couldn't even leave a white mark on its tough skin. The thorns easily pierced into the python's body. The python, which had wanted to escape, suddenly stopped. The superpowered people were very surprised and immediately rushed up. The earth-powered superpowered person was very smart. The sharp earth thorns couldn't pierce the python's skin, but they could blind the python's eyes. When the thorns pierced the python's eyes, it roared in pain and shook its head and tail. However, no matter what it did, it couldn't break free from the vines that had wrapped it up like a fried dough twist. The strength-type paranormal pressed down on the head of the python, and all kinds of special abilities fell down from the sky, drowning the big python directly. The fatal one was a thorn that pierced through the eye socket and into the brain. After the python died, they hurriedly cut open its stomach. Unfortunately, the superpowered person inside was already dead. His hands, feet, and face were corroded by stomach acid, and white bones were exposed. Chapter 137. When they looked at the large field of bright red flowers again, it was as if they were looking at a blooming jimsonweed by the river of forgetfulness. The flowers were particularly beautiful, but there were countless dangers hidden in them. When they collected the juice in the flowers again, they were very careful. Even so, 2 of the paranormals were slightly injured. Moreover, they only dared to collect some at the edge and did not dare to go deep into the flower field. They only collected 3 bottles. Yen Chua looked at such a large field of flowers and then looked at the small bottles with some reluctance. He could not move his feet. They were all excellent experimental materials. He was full of reluctance to give them up. However, he also knew that if he went deep into the flower field, it was very likely that those paranormals would not be able to come back. Just as Yen Chua was looking at the flower field with reluctance, Xiao Qing suddenly walked over. Yen Chua's face changed immediately. He grabbed Xiao Qing and asked, "Qing, what are you doing?" Xiao Qing looked at him in confusion. Wasn't it Yen Chua who showed reluctance just now? She just looked at his pitiful appearance and her heart softened. "I don't want them. Those are enough." Yen Chua's heart softened under Xiao Qing's gaze. He said softly, "Let's go." No matter how precious those experimental materials were, how could they be compared to Xiao Qing? "I'll be fine." Xiao Qing patted Yen Chua's shoulder and curled her lips slightly. She usually had a cold expression and rarely smiled. Now, with just a slight smile, Yen Chua's heart thumped wildly. He watched Xiao Qing walk into the flower field. When she walked in, Xiao Qing raised her hand and countless vines rushed into the sky, opening a path in the flower field. At this time, everyone found that under those beautiful flowers were piles of bones. Some of them were left behind by animals, and some were left behind by humans. It was because of these bones that the flowers on top could bloom so beautifully. Xiao Qing stepped on the white bones and commanded the vines to collect the juice from the flowers into a bottle like a straw. Occasionally, there would be mutated animals that tried to sneak up on her, but they would be whipped away by her vines. Qiao Mo narrowed his eyes and typed the word "danger" behind Xiao Qing's name. Her strength wasn't low, and her personality was unclear. However, how could someone who could tame Yen Chua be a simple person? With that thought in mind, Qiao Mo couldn't help but glance at Yen Chua. Then, he saw a look of desire and dissatisfaction on Yen Chua's face. Qiao Mo covered his eyes. He was going blind. Xiao Qing quickly collected a large pile of flower nectar, and then threw it all to the little brothers to carry. Before entering the forest, they found a hidden place to park the RV. After all, it was simply wishful thinking to drive a car in the forest, let alone an RV. One of the people who had a good relationship with the psychic who died at the beginning was a little angry. He looked young, and he widened his eyes and asked Xiao Qing, "You clearly have the strength to get the liquid. If you took action, there wouldn't be any death. Why didn't you take action at the beginning?" Xiao Qing was very tolerant of this kind of naive young man. She curled the corner of her lips and said, "Why do I have to do it if I have the strength? According to you, if I have the strength, I should go around saving people? Be a shining Virgin Mary? No. I didn't mean that." The young man was a little anxious and stammered, You were right in front of me, you were my partner." "Ah. I don't want to move." Xiao Qing's expression instantly turned cold. She didn't have any obligation to do anything. Just like just now, when she collected the liquid for Yen Chua, she didn't need to do anything. She just wanted to do it. Chapter 138. You. The young man's eyes were a little red, but he wasn't angry. Instead, he felt a little wronged. If Xiao Qing had been the first to make a move, then his friend wouldn't have died. Xiao Qing said kindly, "I have the strength, so I have to do everything. Is it fair for me to take the risk?" The young man tried to refute, but in the end, He realized that if he had the strength of Xiao Qing and was willing to do this, then that would be his personal choice. If Xiao Qing wasn't willing, then that would be Xiao Qing's choice. He had crossed the line. Yan Qiue walked over and naturally leaned on Xiao Qing. He smiled at the young man and said, "Since my baby is willing to tell you more, then I'll tell you a little too. Do you see Qiao Mo standing over there? If he had chosen to make a move first, then there wouldn't have been any casualties. Why don't you blame him? Because he was the leader of the base." This sentence lingered on the young man's lips for a moment, but he didn't say it out loud. He was a little ashamed. Because of their different statuses, he had blamed Xiao Qing and not Xiao Mo. Wasn't this also unfair to Xiao Qing? The young man, whose worldview had been turned upside down, was very sad. Yan Qiue smiled sweetly and patted the young man's shoulder. "Is this also called looking at people through colored glasses?" The young man was even more ashamed. Yan Qiue pulled Xiao Qing back with satisfaction. Xiao Qing said indifferently, "Is it really okay to mislead him like this?" Yan Qiue had an innocent look on his face. Then, he thought sweetly that his wife was still too kind. Based on his personality in the past, if he met someone who dared to criticize his wife, he would definitely sew up that person's mouth or cut off that person's tongue so that he would never be able to say such things again. Qiao Mo, who was unjustly implicated, was speechless. After burying the body, the group continued forward. Qiao Mo even specially gave the crystal core of the python to Xiao Qing. It was a dark green crystal with a deep luster. It looked very beautiful. Xiao Qing graciously accepted the gift and threw it into her space. After all, she was the one who had trapped her in the first place, so why wouldn't she take advantage of it? Yan Qiue snuggled up to Xiao Qing. The area where he touched Xiao Qing was getting hotter and hotter. Xiao Qing couldn't help but glance at Yan Qiue. His face was red and his aroused eyes were flirtatious. But that was not the point. The point was, why was he in heat again? Xiao Qing couldn't help but ask. Yan Qiue replied, "When I saw you in the flower field surrounded by green vines, I couldn't help but think of that day." Then, he reacted. There was a reaction. Xiao Qing was silent for a long time, not knowing how to answer. Nighttime in the forest was the most dangerous time. Every time it was almost nighttime, they had to find a suitable place to set up camp. Then, they would clear the surroundings that might be dangerous and set up the tent. During the process, Xiao Qing and Yan Qiue were in charge of showing off their affection. Although Xiao Qing didn't think so, after dinner, it was time to rest. Xiao Qing didn't know why, but she found it especially hard to fall asleep tonight. She turned over and Yan Qiue naturally hugged her from behind. Her body was clearly cold, but at this moment, she felt that the area where the two of them touched had become hot. Could it be the side effect of that juice during the day? Or was it the feeling of the crystal she swallowed repairing her body? Although her body would heat up in the past, it wasn't this serious. Xiao Qing tossed and turned but couldn't fall asleep. She got up and prepared to go out for a walk. She quietly got up and left the tent without waking Yan Qiue up. Chapter 139. Qiao Mo felt that Yan Qiue was acting strange today. Normally, he would stick close to Xiao Qing, but today, he didn't. It didn't seem like he didn't like Xiao Qing. He was acting like a little wife, sneaking glances at Xiao Qing, and even acting shy. Whenever someone approached Xiao Qing, he would stare at that person. He wouldn't stop until that person's hair stood on end and he left. What was even scarier was that he was wearing a white shirt today. The top two buttons were unbuttoned, exposing the bite marks on his neck and the kiss marks on his collarbone. Qiao Mo was horrified. Could it be that the two of them had sex last night? And it was Yan Qiue's first time. Otherwise, why would Yan Qiue act like a newly married wife? Qiao Mo didn't think too much about it because they had arrived at their destination. The plants that Qiao Mo had described grew in this area. They looked like miniature versions of orange trees, with round leaves that emitted a fragrance that would make anyone who smelled it feel weak all over. Between the branches and leaves hung bright red fruits that looked like begonias or hawthorns. However, their skin was smooth and glossy, making them look very pleasing to the eye. In the center, there was a tree that was taller than the others, and its fruits were bigger than the others. Under the tree were pink lanterns. If one looked carefully, one would find that they weren't lanterns, but a kind of plant, which was emitting a faint light. The little lanterns were very cute. They twinkled and looked like they were floating in the air. In fact, they were supported by a thin stem, which was slightly bent under the weight of the lanterns. In short, the whole plant was emitting a cute aura. "That's our target." Chow Mo pointed at the little lantern and said, "After we collect it, we'll help sister-in-law tame that mutated autumn apple. What do you think?" Xiao Qing nodded. She vaguely felt a trace of danger. She couldn't help but say, "Be careful, everyone. I think something is wrong. Let me try first." An Earth-powered paranormal, who was holding an Earth shield, slowly approached the autumn blossoms. There was no movement in the quiet autumn blossoms. Only when he got closer did he hear a faint rustling sound, which sounded like the wind blowing through the leaves. Amidst the harmony, Xiao Qing heard the faint sound of insects flapping their wings. She looked up and saw a black hornet that was larger than a normal bee circling above the autumn flowers. If he saw a wasp in other places, it would be nothing, but this was a jungle where mutant animals ran rampant. Not to mention a wasp, even a mosquito was so aggressive. "Watch your head," Xiao Qing reminded him. The man looked up and saw that it was only a wasp. He was relieved. Then, countless wasps flew out from the surrounding trees. The dense swarm of wasps looked particularly frightening. The Earth ability user was startled. He rolled over and covered himself with an Earth shield. Another fire ability user hurriedly threw out fireballs. Bees were afraid of fire, but he didn't know whether these mutated wasps were afraid of fire or not. Then, it turned out that they were afraid of fire too. It was probably the nature of bees. Fire could scare them, but it wasn't as deadly as ordinary bees. These wasps could dodge the fireballs, but they were unharmed when they were touched. Seeing this, the fire ability user hurriedly covered the Earth ability user with a fire shield. Then, he covered Xiao Mo and the others, including Xiao Qing. With the fire shield, the wasps wouldn't easily get close. Xiao Mo couldn't help but frown. Get rid of these wasps. If they didn't get rid of them, they wouldn't be able to get close to the lanterns. Chapter 140. The remaining few metahumans immediately stepped forward and used their special skills to deal with these wasps. For a moment, their abilities filled the sky, but they were unable to eliminate many wasps. Because the wasps were too small, they could only attack a large area or rely on luck. Moreover, the wasps were very agile. Most of the wasps had already dodged the attack. Chow Mo also frowned. These wasps were difficult to deal with, but they had to be dealt with. He couldn't help but ask, "Chue, can you temporarily freeze this space?" Yen Chue nodded. "Yes." "Everyone, stop for a moment. Wait for Yen Chue to make a move. Then, immediately focus fire and destroy a large area." Chow Mo waved his hand and said coldly. When they were ready, Yen Chue froze the air, and the hornets immediately froze in the air. The paranormals who were ready instantly focused their fire and cleared out a large number of hornets. The metahumans couldn't help but cheer. Xiao Qing saw that Yen Chue's face was somewhat pale. Controlling such a large area of wasps all at once must be a heavy burden for him. However, there were still many wasps. According to the proportion of wasps that had just been killed, Yen Chue would have to attack at least 5 more times. Xiao Qing couldn't help but say, "I have another way. Let me try it first." Chow Mo naturally gave Xiao Qing face. He ordered the metahumans to temporarily stop and see what Xiao Qing would do. Xiao Qing released her big flower. The man-eating flower hadn't been released to eat for a long time. When Xiao Qing released it, it burped and spat out a few pieces of bone. It looked very much like picking its teeth. The metahumans couldn't help but look at the flower that was constantly opening and closing. The wriggling petals and the mysterious stamen looked very ferocious. As soon as the man-eating flower came out, it began to secrete a sweet and slightly irritating smell. The wasps seemed to have smelled something delicious and began to drill into the flower's mouth. All the wasps that entered the mouth of the man-eating flower would be digested into nutrients for the man-eating flower to absorb in the next second. Therefore, everyone could only see the hornets endlessly entering the man-eating flower's mouth. The number of hornets was clearly enough to fill the man-eating flower's head, but it still didn't look like the man-eating flower was full. Only when all the hornets in the sky had been wiped out did it shake its head and spit out a few broken wings in satisfaction. Several paranormals couldn't help but swallow their saliva and move away from the man-eating flower. Xiao Qing touched the big flower's head and was very satisfied. Xiao Qing was no longer of much use to her, especially after she had reached level 4. She didn't need the piranha flower anymore. Xiao Qing had even considered replacing it, but in the end, she still couldn't bear to do so. After all, he had accompanied her all the way and helped her a lot. Yen Qiue, on the other hand, liked Big Flower very much. She even tried to touch Big Flower's head, but Big Flower almost bit her hand off. Facing such a ferocious flower, Yen Qiue liked it even more. Does it have a name? It's called Big Flower. Xiao Qing knocked on Big Flower's head and told it to be more obedient. When Yen Qiue touched it again, Big Flower was as soft as the usual Yen Qiue when she met Xiao Qing. It's very cute. Yen Qiue sighed sincerely, and then the onlookers also sighed. Sure enough, if you weren't a family, you wouldn't enter the same family. When such ferocious two were together, they were indeed a match made in heaven. They didn't need to ask how Xiao Qing tamed Yen Qiue, because Xiao Qing herself wasn't an ordinary person. Chapter 141. We don't know what kind of danger there will be. Let's let the flower explore the way. Xiao Qing touched the big flower, and the big flower moved. It looked very clumsy, but in fact, it moved very quickly into the autumn flowers. The autumn blossoms were just like the flower field from before. Beneath them were piles of white bones. When the big flower was burrowing inside, it even secretly ate 2 autumn blossoms. In the end, it came back dizzy as if it was drunk. Useless. Xiao Qing sighed and put the flower away. Then she said, I haven't found any other danger yet. Shall we go? Everyone took out the gas masks they had prepared and put them on. They got into the autumn flowers and arrived at the small lanterns safely. The paranormals took out knives and began to cut the small lanterns. The stems of the small lanterns looked very thin, but they were very tough. The knives couldn't cut them. There were also thin vines that looked like whiskers curling up from the ground and stabbing at the paranormals. Those who were stung twitched and fell to the ground. They weren't poisoned to death, but they were paralyzed. If they were paralyzed before the hornets were cleared, they might be stung to death by the hornets that blotted out the sky. But there was no danger now. With this lesson, the others were prepared and didn't get stung again. They easily collected a lot of small lanterns. Xiao Qing also had time to carefully observe the small lanterns. The small lanterns looked pink, and the outer shell was white. The thin layer of skin was filled with liquid, and it was this liquid that was shining. The pink light looked very beautiful, but anyone who approached would feel chills down their spines when they saw the roots of the lantern flower in the white bone layer and the pink light. After retrieving the lantern flowers, Qiao Mo and the others accompanied Xiao Qing to tame the largest autumn tree. This was also the first time Qiao Mo used his ability. Qiao Mo's ability was a very ordinary water type, and the ability he used was also very ordinary. It was to form a layer of water that separated the largest autumn tree from the rest. There were also specks of blue light that flew out from the autumn tree and fell into the water layer. However, Qiao Mo's control over such a simple skill had reached perfection. When he made his move, Xiao Qing didn't even feel any energy fluctuations from his body. This was very rare. At least, Xiao Qing hadn't reached this level yet. The split autumn tree still wanted to struggle, but Xiao Qing stretched out her hand, and a surge of wood elemental energy gushed out from her hands, completely wrapping around the autumn tree. After wrapping it up, one could see the autumn tree's dark green leaves, its darker colored stem, and its red fruits. They all turned emerald green, as if they had been devoured and assimilated. Chapter 142. Xiao Mo's intuition told him that Shao Qing was definitely not lower than level 4. A level 4 wood ability user's value was needless to say. Now that Shao Qing and Yan Qiue were a couple, it meant that Shao Qing was already a member of their base. Well, it seemed that he had to treat Shao Qing better. What if Yan Qiue couldn't keep Shao Qing tied to him? We've got what we need. Collect some autumn tangs and let's go. After Xiao Mo finished speaking, the ability users quickly collected a bag of autumn tangs and prepared to retreat. Although they had lost one person in this operation, they had also gained a lot. Overall, they had gained more than they had lost. Naturally, there were more good things in the jungle, but all of them understood that endless greed would only lead to death, so they obediently followed Xiao Mo back the way they had come. However, before they left the territory, Shao Qing heard some strange noises. She couldn't help but jump up a tree and look into the distance. What she saw gave her a fright. In front of her, there was a dense mass of marching ants that she couldn't see the end of. These ants had another name. They were called man-eating ants. There were many of them, and when they came out to hunt, they often came in a nest of ants, like a marching army. Moreover, these ants were especially scary. Wherever they went, not even a blade of grass grew. Whether it was animals or plants, they would be eaten in an instant. Even an elephant would not be able to last more than a few seconds before it was gnawed into a skeleton. Even with Shao Qing's temperament, she couldn't help but change her expression. She quickly jumped down the tree, picked up Yan Chue, and said, "Split up, marching ants." This time, Shao Qing didn't need to explain. The group quickly divided into two groups. One group followed Shao Qing, which was smaller in number, and ran east. The other group followed Xiao Mo, which was larger in number, and ran west. Although the marching ants would chase living things in their field of vision, they would only chase one side. This way, the other side would definitely survive, and it would depend on who was luckier. Clearly, Shao Qing and Yan Qiue's luck wasn't very good. When Shao Qing ran with Yan Qiue in her arms, she turned around and saw the army of ants behind them. It was a black mass that gave her goosebumps. In the jungle, the most frightening thing wasn't huge beasts, but marching ants. If they encountered huge beasts, they might be able to escape, but if they encountered marching ants, even if they had 9 lives, they probably wouldn't be able to squander it. The marching ants were very fast, almost at the same speed as Shao Qing. The people behind her were not as fast as Shao Qing and were constantly being chased. The two people were so scared that they kept throwing back fireballs and metal thorns. They tried to stop them. However, it was useless. They didn't even achieve their goal of slowing down the marching ants. Soon, a paranormal was caught. The ants had already climbed up his calf from his foot. Soon, they would probably cover his whole body. In panic, he grabbed his companion, and then the ants crawling all over his body followed his hand and climbed to his companion's body. The paranormal screamed and burned the ants on his body with his power. Of course, what he wanted to do more was to shake off the hand that was grabbing him. However, the paranormal caught in the swarm of ants held onto him tightly and wouldn't let go. When Shao Qing looked back, she only saw that the two of them were quickly covered by ants. After the swarm of ants passed, a pile of flesh-colored bones fell to the ground. Marching ants were so scary. Shao Qing didn't have time to sigh. She held Yan Qiue in her arms and stopped running. Instead, she shot out vines and swung from tree to tree like Spider-Man. It was faster this way, and she gradually got rid of the marching ants. The marching ants were very fast, but when they passed by, they had to eat the nearby plants and animals, so their speed was naturally slower. Shao Qing ran desperately again. Although she was still holding Yan Qiue in her arms, she was still faster than the marching ants. "Qing, there is a river in front," Yan Qiue said with some surprise. He was very self-aware that he couldn't run fast. If he insisted on being brave, he would probably lose Shao Qing, who came back to save him. Therefore, he stayed in Shao Qing's arms very obediently. While they were running, Yen Qiue saw a small river in front of them. It was about less than 2 meters wide. The water was clear. Ants should be afraid of water, right? Before Yen Qiue could figure it out, Xiaoqing had already thrown out a vine and firmly wrapped it around a big tree on the other side of the river. Then they swung over. When they swung over, a crocodile jumped up in the middle of the river and tried to bite them. Then Yen Qiue kicked it back into the river, and it turned over dizzily. They landed on the other side of the river. Even with Xiaoqing's physical strength, she couldn't help but gasp slightly. They looked back and were shocked. Those ants had gone into the river. At first, some ants floated in the river and drowned in the end. Later, those ants learned to be smart. They huddled together and rolled into the river. When they passed by the crocodile, they also ate the crocodile that had just turned over. Yen Qiue's eyes widened. Before he could say a word, Xiaoqing carried him and ran away again. He only had time to take a look before he saw a huge black mass of ants rolling ashore and then quickly spreading out. Some ants at the outermost edge drowned, but 99% of the ants successfully crossed the river. 99% of the ants were heading in their direction again. Along the way, no matter if it was a big tree or grass, a rabbit or a wild wolf, they were all eaten up. Yen Qiue's heart was thumping. After a while, he suddenly said, "We can actually turn around." Xiaoqing was also stunned for a moment. Then she quickly turned around and hung herself and the person in her arms on a big tree from afar. Then, the two of them watched as the mighty army of ants ran straight ahead. Not many of them turned around to look for them. Xiaoqing, Yen Qiue, so why were they running for their lives? Chapter 143. When people were in danger, they would probably be confused. They actually forgot to change direction after leaving a safe distance. Leaning against the tree, Xiaoqing kept gasping for breath. As soon as they were safe, she found that even Yen Qiue was covered in a thin layer of cold sweat. She reached out to wipe his forehead. While wiping, her hand froze. How do we get out? Anyway, she didn't know the way. Even if she wasn't a directionally challenged person, in this jungle, she would become a directionally challenged person. She could indeed find a way out. After all, no matter where they went, they would get out of the jungle sooner or later. However, it was not certain where they would end up after getting out. Yen Qiue bit his nails. After a while he said, "I remember that many years ago, I read in a textbook that if you cut down a tree, you can tell north from south by looking at the growth rings. The book also said that you can tell by looking at the sparseness of the leaves." Xiaoqing looked up expressionlessly. Above her head were dense leaves. She could barely see the sun, not to mention the north, south, east, and west. Then Yen Qiue looked around and finally said, "Let's go in the opposite direction of the army ants." No matter what, they had to avoid the group of crazy ants first. Xiaoqing also nodded. The two of them went in the opposite direction of the army ants. Although they were alone, they were not worried. Xiaoqing and Yen Qiue's strength was not low. In terms of safety, as long as they didn't encounter a group of ants like the army ants, there would be no big danger. Xiaoqing's space was not short of food. There were even pots and pans and seasonings. Therefore, even if the two of them walked slowly, they could live a comfortable life. The two of them tried their best to walk along the river. There was a water source and fish in the water. Their life was not bad, but Yen Qiue was a little unhappy. That night was the first time in his 20-odd years of life that he had had sex. It was fine if he didn't have sex, but once he did, he couldn't control himself. Especially when the person he liked was by his side and there was no one in the way, Yen Qiue was a little restless. But Xiaoqing refused to have sex with him. At most, when she couldn't take it anymore, she would press him to the ground and give him a good whipping. But when it came to the real thing, there was nothing else. How could Yen Qiue tolerate this? He felt wronged. He felt that he had always liked Xiaoqing, loved Xiaoqing, and stuck to Xiaoqing. It was probably his wishful thinking. This was because Xiaoqing had never said that she liked him, nor had she ever promised him anything. It was simply because he had chosen her as his first choice. Even in the past, it was because Xiao Qing had been poisoned that they had such an intimate relationship. In fact, Xiao Qing had never admitted their relationship. Yan Chue was very depressed. Indeed, that night, Xiao Qing was very gentle to him. She was so gentle that every time he thought about it, he couldn't help but blush. However, Xiao Qing was a person who was cold on the outside but warm on the inside. Even if it was someone else, she would still be so gentle. Therefore, after that night, Xiao Qing refused to have the most intimate relationship with him again. Thinking about it this way, even if he called her darling, and even if others called her sister-in-law or sister-in-law, she would only be indifferent and never respond. Perhaps Xiao Qing would leave at some point, probably after she recovered from her injury. So when he said that he had to find a way to make her recover, she only smiled faintly and didn't say anything. Thinking about it, Yan Chue became even more depressed. He believed that he had nothing that could make Xiao Qing stay. Money. Power. Xiao Qing didn't care about those things. Strength. Xiao Qing was probably stronger than him. Body. He wanted it, but it didn't mean that Xiao Qing also needed it. Chapter 144. For example, these days, Xiao Qing was a zombie, so she didn't need it at all. He was the one who kept pestering her. However, Xiao Qing was willing to play with him, so she still cared about him. What are you thinking about? Xiao Qing made a fire and couldn't help but glance at Yan Chue. Yan Chue's expression just now was very complicated. One moment he was depressed, the next moment he was about to cry, and the next moment he was a little sweet. Xiao Qing wanted to go up and touch his forehead to see if the temperature was wrong. Yan Chue coughed softly, but still didn't say out what he was thinking. He just said, "I'm thinking, when can we go out together?" Xiao Qing estimated that when they returned to the base, her injury would be almost healed. It was time to go to the air dye. Parting was close at hand. Xiao Qing couldn't help but say to Yan Chue, "I just went to find some non-poisonous mushrooms and made a pot of soup for you. You have to develop the habit of drinking soup when you eat. It's good for your stomach. When you do something in the future, set an alarm. Don't always skip breakfast and lunch, and make your stomach hurt." Yan Chue leaned over and snuggled into Xiao Qing's arms. "Just call me in the future. As long as you call me, I'll put aside any important experiments. Besides, haven't you been making soup for me all this time?" Xiao Qing touched Yan Chue's soft hair and said in a low voice, "But I will leave sooner or later." "Don't say it." Yan Chue hurriedly interrupted Xiao Qing. His thin eyelids drooped down, covering his beautiful eyes. He didn't mention it, but Xiao Qing wanted to. Why did she have to break his fantasy? She didn't even let him have dreams. "Even if you don't say it, I will leave." Xiao Qing said faintly, "My body has almost recovered. After I send you back to the base, I will go find my family." Yan Chue curled up into a ball in Xiao Qing's arms, looking very pitiful. Even though he was tall and thin, he was still a man. He curled up into a ball and trembled slightly. Xiao Qing couldn't help but hug him and said softly, "Thank you for these days. If there's a chance, I'll come back to see you." Yan Chue didn't say anything else. He just trembled. It was as if he had returned to the day he killed his adoptive father with his own hands. Everyone saw him acting pitiful in front of the police, but no one saw that after everyone left, he curled himself into a small ball and trembled in his bed all night. And now, he was even more despairing than he was back then. How could this person be so heartless? He could give up just like that. Yes, because he didn't care, even if he threw it away casually, it didn't matter. Xiao Qing felt that something was wrong. She pushed aside the loose hair in front of Yan Chue's eyes, revealing his delicate eyebrows. When Yan Chue was in front of her, he had always been weak and submissive. Even after some intense things happened, he would show a vulnerable and sexy side. But there was never a time like this where Xiao Qing felt that he was so weak that he would break with a touch. Xiao Qing had never met this type of man before. So when they were together, she had always treated him with her clumsy gentleness. But now, Shao Qing was at a loss. She held his face. Those beautiful eyes were dark and unfocused. Shao Qing had heard Yan Qiue talk about his past, including the killing of his adoptive father. Now, Shao Qing knew that Yan Qiue still cared about it. There was still a knot in his heart. And now, this knot had exploded. "Wake up." Shao Qing frowned and whispered. After a long time, Yan Qiue finally woke up a little. He curled up into a ball and buried his head in his knees. He looked panicked and helpless. Chapter 145. He was going to be abandoned anyway, so why should he struggle? Shao Qing was a little anxious. She felt that she might have hurt Yan Qiue. Now she was afraid that if she left, this cute man who called her baby with a sweet voice would break down. When they first met, Shao Qing didn't think that she would have such a deep impact on a man, so she didn't worry about what would happen to this man if she left. "Yan Qiue, wake up." Shao Qing pinched Yan Qiue's chin and bit hard on Yan Qiue's collarbone, leaving a shallow bite mark. There was even a little blood oozing out of the bite mark. Yan Qiue trembled and couldn't help but raise a hand to cover his eyes. His fragile appearance was very pitiful. After a long time, he asked in a hoarse voice with a hint of fear, "Can't you not leave? You can bring your family over. Do you have a boyfriend? I won't tell him what happened between us. I just want to look at you. I can even look at you from afar. I don't have a boyfriend, but I have a child and many friends. When you met me, you saw my situation. They are probably injured, so I have to go back." Shao Qing said softly, "I live in the S-City Survivor Base. I can promise you that if you want, you can move here. If you don't want, I will come back to see you after I settle my family." Yan Qiue, who was prepared to be abandoned, moved his hand away. His red eyes looked like a rabbit that didn't get to eat a carrot, but now they were shining. "What did you just say?" "I said, if you are willing to move here, we can live together. My house in the S-City Survivor Base is a little small. If you move here, I will apply for a bigger house. If you don't want to move here, it's okay. I will come to see you often." Shao Qing just finished speaking, and Yan Qiue, who was originally very dispirited, threw himself at her. He rolled in her arms. "Are you going to give up on me?" Shao Qing was almost thrown to the ground by him. She quickly caught him. "No, I'm just worried that you are happy here and don't want to leave. If that's the case, if I say that I want to take you away and you don't want to leave, it will be a slap in my face. No, I will follow you wherever you go." Yan Qiue was suddenly happy. He thought that he was going to be abandoned again. Fortunately, Shao Qing was not going to abandon him. Yan Qiue, who was relaxed, lay in Shao Qing's arms contentedly and asked in a low voice, "Do you have a baby? How old is he? What does he like? Do you need me to bring something for him?" Shao Qing stirred the fire and then said, "My son is 1 year old this year. He was born after I became a zombie, so his physique is different from ordinary people. Although he was born less than a year ago, he looks like a 4 or 5-year-old child. You don't need to bring anything for him. In addition, I also raised a zombie called Dai. He doesn't bite, but he's very clingy. I also adopted a very pitiful girl called Xiao Tong. She's very introverted and doesn't know how to speak. Lastly, she's my teammate. I have a team of ability users. Other than my family, the members are Yan Honqing, Gu Chuan, and Gu Panpan. You will see them when you see them." Yan Qiue quickly made a list in his heart. From the order of a person's introduction, he could see the position of the people she introduced in her heart. Therefore, even if those people mentioned by Shao Qing were very important to her, there should be a ranking. This ranking should be her son, then Dai, Xiao Tong, and finally her teammates. Chapter 146. An Dai of the same kind as Shao Qing sounded very threatening. Since Xiao Tong was a girl, the threat could be eliminated. In that case, Yan Qiue's goal was to successfully enter the position in Xiao Qing's heart, which was second only to Little Bun. Yan Qiue had already started to plan before he even moved in. Xiao Qing looked at Yan Qiue's thoughtful expression and couldn't help but laugh. "What are you worried about? Don't worry, you're very cute. They will like you." Yan Qiue was instantly killed by "you're very cute." He was still thinking about the trick of palace intrigue, but in an instant, he became shy. Just as he was about to say something, he suddenly heard very faint footsteps in the dark. His expression immediately turned cold and he shouted, "Who is it?" "It's me." A person walked out from the dark. It was the young man who questioned Xiao Qing earlier. He slowly walked over. Yan Qiue was originally relieved, but he suddenly felt that something was wrong. The young man's face was frighteningly pale, and his expression and footsteps were very stiff. He couldn't help but ask, "Didn't you run away with Qiao Emo? Why are you here?" "We got separated." The young man's voice was hoarse, and his eyes were unfocused when he spoke. Just as he approached, he was blocked by an air wall formed by Yan Qiue. "Who exactly are you?" "Oh no, what are you?" The young man's mouth twitched, and even his smile was very stiff. "I'm your companion." As soon as the last word was said, he suddenly opened his mouth and stuck out a long, bright red tongue. It instantly broke through Yan Qiue's air barrier, and its target was Xiao Qing. Yan Qiue's expression turned cold, and a surge of power surged out, directly condensing the air around the tongue. Xiao Qing quickly pulled out her military knife and jumped up. The knife was sharp, and in a flash, the long red tongue was cut off. The young man let out an inhuman cry, and his eyes instantly turned into the slit pupils of a snake. His 4 limbs were on the ground, and he quickly pounced towards Xiao Qing. From the start, his target was very clear, which was Xiao Qing. Xiao Qing also did not understand what this thing was, but her reaction was very fast. She stretched out her hand, and vines drilled out from the ground, quickly binding the youth's 4 limbs. Yan Qiue very tacitly stretched out his hand and grabbed, condensing the air around the youth's body. His 5 fingers quickly closed, and the youth's body seemed to have been stuffed with a bomb, quickly exploding. After the explosion, a slender white thing quickly burrowed into the ground. No one knew where it went. "What the hell is that?" Yan Qiue said with some difficulty. He had never seen anything that could control a corpse and make it speak. It was very obvious that the youth was already dead before he appeared in front of them. Xiao Qing did not know either. She vigilantly released De Hua, and then said, "I'll keep watch tonight. Have a good sleep. If it comes in the middle of the night and you're very tired, we'll lose half of our combat power." Yan Qiue also knew that Xiao Qing had a special body. Even if she did not sleep for a few nights, it would be fine. He did not pretend to be strong, and just stretched out his hand to Xiao Qing like a spoiled child. "Hug me to sleep, okay?" Xiao Qing was expressionless. She had always been amenable to coaxing, but not coercion. In the end, she was completely under Yan Qiue's control. "Sleep well, and don't move." Yan Qiue immediately nodded obediently. Then, he suddenly knelt down and quickly kissed Xiao Qing's lips. "Good night kiss." Then, he quickly lay down. Xiao Qing was very helpless. She picked him up again and spread a blanket on the ground. Then, she hugged Yan Qiue and sat down. Yan Qiue rested his head on Xiao Qing's legs and closed his eyes in satisfaction. When Xiao Qing lowered her head, she could see his delicate facial features, especially his thin and gorgeous red lips. She could not help but think of that night when Yan Qiue knelt beside her sincerely. His warm lips and flexible tongue. Xiao Qing shivered and coughed to cover it up. In that aspect, she was actually a very cold person. However, after meeting Yan Qiue, it was as if she had been infected. She actually thought of such dirty things. Yan Qiue secretly opened his eyes and glanced at Xiao Qing's cold eyes. She had the same expression almost all day long. She looked like she did not want anyone to get close to her. However, Yan Qiue had been with her for a long time. Gradually, he could distinguish many subtle things from her unchanging expression. For example, now, Shao Qing was absent-minded and a little shy. Could it be? At this moment, Yan Qiue's thoughts were synchronized with Shao Qing's. He stuck out his pink tongue and licked his red lips. Like a seductive fox demon, he said to Shao Qing, "The moonlight is just right. Master, do you need me to serve you?" Then, Yan Qiue was slapped by Shao Qing. "Sleep. Get enough energy. Don't think about nonsense. There is still a monster secretly watching you." Yan Qiue could not help but feel a little resentful. If it were not for that monster, he might have seduced a Qing until she could not control herself tonight. No matter what, he must kill that monster, to relieve the hatred in his heart. Go to sleep. Shao Qing covered the fire. Although the fire could drive away many wild beasts, it could also attract many wild beasts that were not afraid of light. Shao Qing covered up the fire until it was very weak, so there wasn't much warmth. Shao Qing was afraid that Yan Qiue would catch a cold after sleeping, so she took out a thick cotton-padded coat from her space and covered Yan Qiue with it. His body was very weak. He could not stand the torment. If he caught a cold, it would be very harmful to his body. Thinking of this, Shao Qing touched her chin. She could not whip him every day. Although she controlled her strength very well every time, it was also harmful to his body. Now that Shao Qing had put Yan Qiue under her wing and was ready to help him recover, then, abstinence was also necessary. It was decided so happily. Chapter 147. The first half of the night was very peaceful, and even the faint sound of insects could not be heard. Shao Qing knew very well that there was definitely a very terrifying monster lurking in the dark. Otherwise, how could there not be even the sound of insects in this jungle? In the second half of the night, Shao Qing keenly heard a strange sound. It was very strange and muffled, as if someone was digging a hole. She instantly became vigilant and grabbed the handle of the military knife. The big flower, which was originally protecting its head with two big leaves and looked like it was sleeping, also suddenly became vigilant and opened its petals. Yan Qiue also woke up, but he did not speak. He narrowed his eyes and was already brewing his superpower in the palm of his hand. After a while, a corner of the quilt suddenly broke, and a milky white tentacle drilled out of the ground. The tentacle was very fast. After it drilled out, it flew in the direction of Shao Qing. Yan Qiue's movements were even faster. He suddenly stretched out his hands and put the tentacle between them. He suddenly activated his superpower and directly fixed the tentacle. This time, the tentacle did not wait for Shao Qing to make a move. It suddenly shook, and Yan Qiue's air barrier was broken. Seeing that the tentacle was about to penetrate Yan Qiue's neck, Shao Qing threw the military knife over. The knife grazed the tip of Yan Qiue's nose and cut off the front part of the tentacle. Milky white liquid immediately spurted out. Yan Qiue hurriedly rolled backwards to avoid the spray of liquid. His eyes were indeed sharp. The liquid was poisonous. As soon as it landed on the quilt, it instantly corroded the quilt until there was no trace of it left. Cold sweat appeared on Yan Qiue's forehead. When he raised his head again, he saw that the tentacle wriggled and grew out again. Damn, isn't this the same as being invincible? Shao Qing was very focused on holding the military knife. With a wave of her other hand, the green vines flew out and entangled with the tentacle. The tentacle quickly burrowed back into the ground. Shao Qing's vines missed, but she was not discouraged. She pulled Yan Qiue and guarded the surroundings vigilantly. God knows when the tentacle would suddenly burrow out again. The surroundings were silent. After a long time, the tentacle still didn't come out. Yan Qiue's tense heartstrings immediately tensed up even more. He asked in a low voice, "What exactly is this thing?" Just as he spoke, the ground beneath Shao Qing's feet loosened, and the white tentacles emerged again, attempting to entangle her legs. Shao Qing quickly took a step back. She didn't have time to pick up the military knife in the distance, so she used the vines as a whip and threw them out. She had been trained by Yan Qiue for the past 2 days. She was already very good at playing with whips. As soon as the vine whip was thrown out, it entangled with the white tentacle and tightened. The tentacle, which had failed in its attack and was trying to burrow back into the ground, was entangled by Shao Qing. That thing was exceptionally strong. Shao Qing staggered. She hurriedly exerted force with her feet to stabilize her body and then pulled out with all her might. Shao Qing could see that there was still a section buried under the tentacle. This tentacle had the ability to regenerate. Although she couldn't tell for the time being how many times it could regenerate, it would grow back again and again after being hit. Not to mention other things, it would consume a lot of energy. Therefore, in order to think of a way to deal with it, she first had to see clearly what it was. Shao Qing exerted force and pulled out another section of the tentacle. That tentacle was like a taut rubber band. When Yen Chue saw this, he hurriedly helped Shao Qing. Their combined strength was stronger than the tentacle. It desperately tried to pull back, but it was still pulled out section by Shao Qing. Chapter 148. At this time, the big flower moved closer. It knew what its master was going to do, so it didn't bite. Instead, it dripped a drop of digestive fluid from the flower's head. The digestive fluid was very corrosive. As soon as it touched the tentacle, white smoke rose. The tentacle shrank in pain, and then the whole thing was pulled out by Shao Qing and Xiao Mu. As soon as it was pulled out, Shao Qing saw the appearance of this thing. It was simply a big white maggot. There were 2 small dots at the bottom, which should be its eyes. Its mouth was open, showing its jagged sharp teeth. What the hell was this? A big white maggot that could control corpses? Could it be that it was the same as what was written in those grave-robbing novels? What kind of corpse maggot was that? Yen Chue gasped when he saw this thing. Shao Qing didn't know it, but he knew it. He was very keen on studying the mutated animals and plants after the apocalypse. It could be said that he could roughly describe most of the mutated animals. He had seen a small one before. A long time ago, their base had gone to the city to complete a mission. After returning from the mission, one of the members suddenly went crazy and bit his companion who was sleeping in the same room as him to death. After subduing him, Chao Mo sent him to Yen Chue. He wanted Yen Chue to see what had happened to him. Yen Chue dissected the man and found a worm at the position of his energy source. It was a small version of this big white maggot. One of its heads was connected to the nerves of the brain, and the other head was drilled into the energy core. The energy core was almost sucked dry by it. Yen Chue studied the worm in detail and found that this kind of worm could control corpses. However, the corpses that were controlled would rot like normal corpses. If the controlled man and his companions hadn't fought zombies for so long, their bodies would have been covered in zombie blood and a rotten smell. Otherwise, they would have been discovered long ago. Unfortunately, the worm died after being tortured by him. He hadn't figured out what kind of species it was, but one thing was clear. This kind of worm could only live in rotten flesh. If it lost its host, it would die if it didn't find a corpse to live in for a long time. Yen Chue quickly told her what he knew. Shao Qing couldn't help but frown. It wasn't her fault. It was just that this thing was too disgusting. Even when it was tied up, it kept opening and closing its sharp teeth, spitting out yellow mucus. The yellow mucus was very corrosive. When it landed on Shao Qing's vines, it almost corroded them. The white worm turned its head abruptly and bit the vine. Its sharp teeth could bite through the energy crystal core, so biting off a vine was a piece of cake for it. The white worm bit off the vines and wanted to run away, but the big flower that was waiting for it bit the lower half of its body. The worm was quite ruthless. Like a gecko that had its tail cut off, it left the lower half of its body and burrowed into the ground. It ran away, Shao Qing said with a frown. If they didn't deal with it once, it wouldn't dare to come out. However, it would definitely tail them and wait for an opportunity to attack them. This was really a very annoying thing. Shao Qing picked up the big flower that had secretly swallowed half of the white worm. She washed its flower head several times with water before putting it away. There's still some time before dawn. You can sleep for a while. It won't dare to come out for a while. Xiao Qing took out a new quilt and changed it to a clean place. I'm not going to sleep. Yan Chue sat down next to Xiao Qing energetically, then said, let's talk. In fact, most of the time, Yan Chue was talking and Xiao Qing was listening. Chapter 149. In the end, Yan Chue suddenly asked, what kind of man do you like? Xiao Qing was stunned by the question. Then she blurted out, obedient and sensible. Then, she fell silent. Probably because of Lin Qifan, she was naturally wary of men who looked sunny and gentle. Instead, her desire to control soared. She began to like the type that she couldn't stand the most in the past. To put it bluntly, he was the type that Xiao Qing could control. Only such a man could give Xiao Qing a sense of security. After a moment of silence, Xiao Qing added, and he must like children. Yan Chue calculated in his mind. He felt that he could do everything except the last one. As for the last one, he could be trained to like children. Yan Chue relaxed a lot. Then, he inched towards Xiao Qing and looked at Xiao Qing eagerly. Tell me about your past. Although I didn't participate in your past life, I want to know. There was nothing to hide. Xiao Qing simply picked some of her past to tell Yan Chue. For example, she was an orphan and had been a soldier for a period of time. She was currently single and raising a child. Yan Chue's eyes were cold. He was so jealous of the man who could make Xiao Qing give birth to his child. However, Xiao Qing was currently single, which meant that the man was probably dead. Although that was his speculation, Yan Chue was still worried. He pretended to ask, will the child's father object to me living in your house? Xiao Qing lowered her head and polished her nails. When she heard Yan Chue's words, she raised her head and smiled. Don't test him. He's not by my side. I'm afraid he already thinks I'm dead. But this is good. It's more interesting to appear in front of him when he's at his proudest and take everything away from him. When Xiao Qing smiled, her eyes curved into crescents and she looked particularly gentle. However, Yan Chue felt a bone-chilling coldness. At the same time, his jealousy towards that man turned into real hatred. What had he done to make Xiao Qing like this? Xiao Qing must have been very hurt back then. Otherwise, she wouldn't have hated him so much. When he met that man, he would definitely avenge Xiao Qing. Let's not talk anymore. You should sleep a little longer. We still have to hurry tomorrow morning. Xiao Qing forced Yan Chue to lie on the quilt. Yan Chue still wanted to say something, but then she saw Xiao Qing's gloomy eyes. He immediately lay down obediently, indicating that he was going to sleep immediately. Yan Chue's thoughts were in a whirl. She originally thought that she would close her eyes to think about things until dawn, but in the end, she fell asleep the moment she closed her eyes. When she woke up again, it was already the next day. When she opened her eyes, the firewood beside her was making crackling sounds. Yan Chue rubbed his eyes and then saw a small pot on the bonfire. There was something boiling in the pot. Xiao Qing was sitting on the side, using a military knife to cut mushrooms. She cut the mushrooms into small pieces and threw them into the pot. When Yan Chue thought that last night, it was this military knife that cut off the white worm, he suddenly lost his appetite. Xiao Qing followed Yan Chue's complicated gaze and looked at the military knife in her hand. Then she suddenly understood and explained, I cleaned it. Yan Chue rationally didn't think about how many zombies this military knife had stabbed and how many people it had killed. Then he took a bottle of water to wash his face. Then he sat beside Xiao Qing and waited for breakfast. Xiao Qing didn't need to eat, so there was only one possibility for her to get up early to cook, and that was for him. Thinking of this, Yan Chue's heart was sweet. Chapter 150. Yan Chue cooked the mushroom porridge. The rice was fresh, and she added some shredded jerky and chicken gizzards. There was also a plucked and cleaned pheasant lying beside it. The pheasant was caught when she went to look for mushrooms. She was going to make lunch for Yen Chiue. In fact, old hens were the most suitable to nourish the body. There was no need to add anything else. She just added some ginseng and stewed the whole chicken. After stewing, she took the whole chicken out, tore it into strips, and boiled it a little. The soup was delicious and the meat was soft. The key was that it was very nutritious. However, in the wild, there was no time to stew a chicken in such a complicated way. Xiao Qing was just going to chop the chicken and stew it with some mushrooms. The taste was not bad. The mushroom and shredded meat porridge was very delicious. When Yen Chiue took the first bite, he drank a big mouthful because of the love porridge that Xiao Qing specially made for him. After the first mouthful, Yen Chiue's eyes lit up. He finished a small pot of porridge by himself. Finally, he lay on the quilt and rubbed his stomach in satisfaction. His little belly was round and looked very good to the touch. Xiao Qing could not help but stretch out her sinful right hand and lift up Yen Chiue's clothes to touch his little belly. It was soft and the skin was silky smooth. It felt good to the touch. Yen Chiue, who was full and had his belly touched, was a little excited. Even if he could not eat meat, he could at least drink some soup, right? He lay on the quilt and winked at Xiao Qing. Baby, slap me, that ecstasy, the buttons that automatically unbuttoned, and the snow-white chest that was exposed to the air were indeed very seductive. Xiao Qing smiled and stretched out her hand. Yen Chiue's body immediately tensed up, waiting for Xiao Qing to give him pain and pleasure. Then, the buttons were buttoned up by Xiao Qing. Stop fooling around. There is still a monster hiding in the dark. Be good. Pack up and let's go. Yen Chiue's eyes widened. Wait a minute, that was not how the script was written. He was already unable to hold back his thirst. However, Xiao Qing had already started to pack up. She cleaned the pots and pans and put them into her storage space. She began to think that she would go shopping again when she returned to the base to replenish her storage space. Yen Chiue could only watch Xiao Qing pack up and wave to him. Let's go. We'll be safe once we leave this jungle. That thing couldn't possibly follow them all the way back to the base, so as long as they left the forest, they would have gotten rid of that thing. Yen Chiue slowly got up and left with Xiao Qing. The forest was dense, and even the grass on the ground was knee-deep. In some places, the grass was almost as tall as a person. Even Xiao Qing and the others didn't dare to enter such bushes. Who knew what was living in there? If they failed, they would have a lot to cry about. For the rest of the afternoon, that thing didn't come out. At noon, Xiao Qing stewed a pot of chicken stew with mushrooms. The wild chicken in the jungle was especially tasty and chewy. Yen Chiue ate it to his heart's content. If it weren't for the fact that he couldn't preserve it, he would have caught a few back and let Xiao Qing cook it for him. 2 days had passed since the night of the sneak attack. Xiao Qing and the others took a detour and returned to the place where they picked up the lantern flowers. Xiao Qing also picked a lantern flower and used a thin branch as the stem. She strung the stem with a string and used it to make a lantern. At night, the lantern's light was very weak, but it was very beautiful and wouldn't attract wild animals. It was killing 2 birds with 1 stone. On the 4th day, they were almost at the edge of the forest, but they still didn't meet Xiao Mo and the others. The big white bug also didn't appear again. Yen Chiue thought that it had given up. However, even if it didn't appear, the 2 didn't let down their guard at all. After all, this was a matter of life and death. After easily nailing a snake to the ground, Xiao Qing picked up the lantern. The sun had set, and the mutant animals were about to come out to look for food. Xiao Qing made a prompt decision. Let's stop first. You eat something to replenish your strength. Then we won't rest tonight. We'll leave tonight. We're not far from the forest. Yen Chiue nodded and took the initiative to patrol. Xiao Qing used the materials on the spot to skin the snakes she killed and take out their gallbladders. The more poisonous a snake was, the more tender its meat was. When Xiao Qing was active in the Golden Triangle, she often used the local materials and ate all kinds of wild animals. Dealing with snakes was a piece of cake. She pulled out the fangs and removed the venom sacs. The remaining snake meat was not poisonous at all. There was no need to add any seasoning. She simply added some oil, salt, soy sauce, and vinegar to cook it, and it was delicious. The snakes were skinned and boned, so they couldn't be eaten at all. She dug through the grass and picked up 2 toads. Toads were also poisonous. The lumps on their backs would ooze out toad crisps. Although they looked ugly, they could be eaten even if they were skinned. When a person was in a desperate situation, they could really eat anything. Xiao Qing used to have a teammate who was proficient in this aspect. He had stewed radishes with toad meat for her. Without thinking about the raw ingredients, the taste was superb. Xiao Qing added a little bit of chicken essence to make it more fresh, and then a pot of meat was ready. The white and tender meat floated in the milky white soup, and the aroma spread for a few miles. She called Yen Chue back and scooped a bowl for her. "Try it." Yen Chue took it and tasted it. The meat was tender and fragrant. When he bit it, the soup overflowed. It was more delicious than the delicacies he had eaten. Yen Chue couldn't help but take a sip of the soup. The soup was very fresh. Although there were no seasonings, it was enough to be called fresh. He ate several bowls and even drank the soup. He wiped his mouth and touched his belly. Then, he asked curiously, "What kind of meat is this? It tastes very good, but I can't tell what animal it is." Xiao Qing calmly cleaned up the pot and then said, "The big piece is toad meat, and the small piece is snake meat. Remove the bones, cut them into pieces, and stew them." "I said it tastes different." Yen Chue froze. He suddenly realized that Xiao Qing seemed to be talking about toads and snakes. His stomach immediately turned. Was he going to vomit, or vomit? Chapter 151. As they ran forward, Yen Chue's expression was extremely strange. She looked like she wanted to vomit but couldn't. In short, her expression was very strange. Xiao Qing, on the other hand, calmly followed beside her. But when they moved forward, she would carefully listen to the nearby sounds. The closer they were to the edge of the forest, the calmer and more cautious she became. The most dangerous place was the safest place. This sentence was the same in reverse. Xiao Qing couldn't help but remind Yen Chue, "Be careful. We'll be able to leave the forest soon. This is its last chance." Yen Chue nodded cautiously. He was also an experienced person. Naturally, he knew how many people failed at the last step. He was now working hard in both his love and career. He didn't want to fail here. The two of them reached the edge of the forest. They were about to step out of the forest, but they still didn't hear the monster's attack. Just when they thought that the monster had given up on them, a large milky white worm drilled out of the ground right under Yen Chue's feet. This time, it had improved a lot. Xiao Qing didn't hear any sound and it reached under Xiao Qing's feet. If it was someone else, they might have been tricked by it. However, Xiao Qing and Yen Chue had been vigilant for the whole night. Naturally, they wouldn't be tricked. Xiao Qing cut the big white worm's head with the military knife in her hand. The worm suddenly lowered its head and swung its tail at Xiao Qing's wrist like a whip. The knife in Xiao Qing's hand spun in a circle as if it was dancing. Then, she stabbed the big worm's tail in a very awkward position. This time, the big worm was stabbed through. It was so painful that the big worm curled its tail and swung it at Xiao Qing with the military knife. Xiao Qing didn't have time to pull out the military knife. She rolled and dodged the whip. The big white worm's tail fell hard on the ground, creating a small hole. Yen Chue immediately froze the air around the big white bug, making it unable to move temporarily. Xiao Qing stretched out her 10 fingers and grabbed the bug's tail. Even with Xiao Qing's mental fortitude, she couldn't help but want to vomit. Xiao Qing's fingernails had already pierced into the big white worm's tail, and a milky white liquid immediately emerged. However, Xiao Qing's fingernails were exceptionally tough and did not corrode. The big white bug turned its head and wanted to bite Xiao Qing, but Yen Chue punched it in the face. Yen Chue's palm was covered with an air barrier, and the punch made the big white bug lean back. Then, the big white bug was tightly bound by vines that drilled out from the ground. Xiao Qing grabbed its tail and tore it with all her might. The big white bug's tail was torn into two from the middle, all the way to the middle of its body. It shook its head and wagged its tail in pain. Suddenly, a strange white light appeared on its body, and the vines dissolved in an instant. The big white bug straightened up like a carp, and the lower half of its body instantly grew back. It turned around and was about to burrow into the ground to escape. This time, it was in pain. It clearly understood that it was definitely no match for Xiao Qing and Yen Qiue. It was ready to give up on Xiao Qing, an excellent host. It wanted to run, but Xiao Qing wasn't going to let it run. Who did it think she was? It wanted to run away after harassing her? How could there be such a good thing in the world? Xiao Qing sneered. She didn't use her vines to block it. She just waved her hand, and a few black cracks suddenly appeared beside the big white bug. The cracks were very small, and looked like miniature versions of lightning. However, the moment the cracks appeared and touched the big white bug's body, the big white bug seemed to be torn apart by something. It was immediately torn into several pieces, and several pieces of its body rolled on the ground. Chapter 152. However, this thing's vitality was really tenacious. It didn't die even after that. With a sway of its body, the lower half of its body slowly grew back. Xiao Qing finally realized that its fatal point was on its head. Every time she attacked its head, it would use its tail to block it. As long as its head was fine, its tail could grow back at any time. It was no wonder that it didn't care about its tail. Just as the big white worm's body grew back, Xiao Qing's military knife was already stuck in its head. Every time it grew back, it was at its weakest. Xiao Qing's guess was right. That knife was stuck right in the middle of the big white worm's head. An inch down, it would be the crystal. The big white worm's body twitched twice, its mouth full of sharp teeth weakly opening and closing. Xiao Qing stabbed another inch in before it completely stopped moving. After a few more seconds, the stiff body instantly dissolved, leaving behind a milky white crystal the size of a fist lying on the ground. Xiao Qing picked it up and used her ability to test it. Then, she threw it to Yen Qiue. It can't be absorbed. You can use it to study this thing. She only intervened once, and the big white worm died. Yen Qiue, who was basically a bystander, was speechless. She felt a sense of shame as if she was being kept. After dealing with the big white worm, Xiao Qing heaved a sigh of relief. After the two of them walked out of the forest, they were dumbfounded. This wasn't the way they came at all. Xiao Qing and Yen Qiue walked one round. They were out, but they didn't know where they were. There should be a signal if we walk a little further. I'll contact Xiao Mo and see if I can get in touch with him, Yen Qiue said as she touched the signal transmitter. Xiao Qing nodded. At this time, the sky was just starting to brighten, and half of the sun's face was exposed in the east. The two of them chose a path that seemed easier to walk on and walked forward. They had just taken 2 steps when 2 people jumped out of the bushes by the side of the road. Stop. Did you come from the jungle? Xiao Qing gave Yen Qiue a look, telling him not to act rashly. Yen Qiue immediately said, Yes, we came out of the jungle. What's the matter? The 2 men looked at each other and whispered for a while. One of them put away his gun and ran away. The other one pointed his gun at Xiao Qing and said, Don't move. If you touch my gun, it won't have eyes. A cold light flashed in Xiao Qing's eyes. No one had ever dared to point a gun at her head. Not to mention 2 people with guns. Even if there were 4 or 5 people, she and Yen Qiue could easily deal with them. What she was afraid of was that they had backup and could kill their master with random punches. As Xiao Qing expected, after a while, a small group of people came from not far away. There were about a dozen of them, and the leader was a man in dark sportswear with an MP5 in his hand. He looked to be in his 30s. He came to the 2 of them and asked bluntly, Did you 2 really come out of the jungle? Yen Qiue nodded and said, I'm from Linchuan Survivor Base. We ran into some danger in the jungle and got separated from the rest of our team. The man nodded and said, I'm not a robber. Now we're going into the jungle to look for something. You two come with us. As long as we find it, I promise I'll let you two come out safely and escort you back to Linchuan Survivor Base. Yen Qiue's face darkened. They had finally left that damned place, and now they had to go back? He instinctively wanted to refuse, but then he saw the fierce look in the leader's eyes. Yen Qiue knew that if he dared to refuse, these people would definitely kill him immediately. Chapter 153. Besides, he didn't think that these people would be kind enough to let them go. Shao Qing gave Yen Qiue a look. Yen Qiue understood and said, Okay, but you have to guarantee our safety. The leader immediately smiled and said, Of course. You can go to Hunan Survivor Base and ask around. Who doesn't know about me, Mao III? I'm an honest man who keeps his word. Shao Qing snickered in her heart. What an honest person. She could clearly see that this group of people was plotting something big. Once they found something, they would definitely make a move on Shao Qing and the others. There were quite a lot of people in this group. If Shao Qing fought with them, both sides would be injured. Instead of that, it was better to go into the forest and slowly find a way to kill them. Both of you, tell me your abilities and levels. We can get familiar with each other so that we can cooperate better in battle. Mao III said with a smile. Shao Qing didn't underestimate this smiling tiger. She secretly released the daughter seed and attached it to Mao III. When a paranormal reached a certain level, it would be easy to find out if a foreign object entered their body. Moreover, the daughter seed couldn't break through their defense. Shao Qing stuck the daughter seeds on Mao Laosan's body. As long as he was injured, the daughter would take the opportunity to take root in his body. I'm a wood paranormal. I'm at the peak of rank 2. The plants I tamed are vines and man-eating flowers. Shao Qing raised her hand and released a vine. She hid her aura very well. The level of her aura was at the peak of rank 2. It was enough to fool Mao III. Yen Qiue wasn't as good as Shao Qing in this aspect. He couldn't hide his aura perfectly. Fortunately, his level wasn't high. I'm also at the peak of rank 2. My ability is air manipulation. Mao III was scared for a moment, but then he relaxed. 2 second-order pinnacle paranormals were not weak, but his team's overall strength was much higher than Shao Qing's, so he didn't have to worry about not being able to control them. As a result, Shao Qing and Zhang Wuji, who had just left the forest, had no choice but to bitterly return. The two of them exchanged glances as they walked, and were already prepared to strike first to gain the upper hand. Especially Yen Qiue. He clearly saw that Mao III was drooling when he looked at Shao Qing. He guessed that when they found the thing, the first thing they would do was to kill Yen Qiue and do something unspeakable to Shao Qing. Yen Qiue was very angry. He knew that his wife was beautiful, but she was coveted by another man. That man had bad intentions, so Yen Qiue couldn't stand it anymore. He had to find a way to kill him. If his wife was coveted by another man, he wouldn't be a man if he didn't kill him. Before entering the forest, Yen Qiue had given Shao Qing 2 small bottles. One of the bottles contained 2 red pills, which were invincible pills that could instantly increase a person's combat strength. In the other bottle, there was a golden liquid. This thing was truly invincible. After drinking it, no matter how serious the injury was, it would be able to revive on the spot with full health and full spirit. Although the side effects of these 2 things were very serious, they could save a person's life at a critical moment. Shao Qing quietly put the 2 things into her space. She wouldn't use these 2 things unless it was a critical moment and she had no other choice. Yen Qiue didn't give them to Shao Qing. He planned to take the pills and protect Shao Qing during a critical moment. When the crisis was over and he was weak, Shao Qing would protect him. Chapter 154. If Mao III observed Yen Qiue's eyes carefully, he would find them extremely cold and cruel. At this moment, Shao Qing directly lit a candle for Mao III. Others didn't know, but Shao Qing was very clear. Although Yen Qiue was gentle in front of her, he was actually very cruel. He was also very vengeful. Mao III had offended Yen Qiue so many times. If he didn't die miserably, Shao Qing would change her surname. After walking back, Shao Qing deliberately said kindly, "There are a lot of small flying insects in the forest at night, such as mosquitoes. Once they bite someone, the person will be swollen and filled with pus. If it's serious, the person will even die. We don't have a tent, so we must be careful at night." Mao III didn't care about mosquitoes and flies, but he knew that Shao Qing and Yen Qiue had stayed in the forest for a long time. If they dared to say that, they must have a reason. He hastily ordered his subordinates. As for whether his subordinates would listen to him, he couldn't do anything about it. Would they listen to him? Who would believe that mosquitoes could kill people? However, Shao Qing insisted that they didn't believe it. At night, they left a few people to keep watch and went to sleep. Shao Qing and Yen Qiue were special, so they naturally didn't need to keep watch. They slept until dawn. The next morning, they were awakened by a scream. Shao Qing lazily got up. She rubbed her eyes and looked at the source of the scream. It was a young man. His face was pale as if he had seen a ghost. There was a person lying motionless by his feet. Mao III was squatting by the side and checking with a serious expression. Shao Qing and Yen Qiue walked over. The man was lying on the ground and looked like he was asleep. However, he was no longer breathing. There was a lump on his face and pus was flowing out. It seemed that he had been bitten by a mosquito. However, no one believed that it was a fatal wound. Mao III's face became more and more pale. He directly took off all the clothes of the man on the ground and checked for any other wounds. He had to admit that the man was probably bitten to death by a mosquito. But there were so many people around, and a few of them had been bitten by mosquitoes, but they were all fine. Why was he the only one who died? Mao San's face was as ugly as the bottom of a pot. After a while, he said, "Bury him." The other people's faces were pale. They carried the man to the side and prepared to dig a hole to bury him. Mao Laosan stood up and looked at Shao Qing and Yen Qiue. "Almost all of my brothers were bitten. Why are you two fine?" Shao Qing's eyes turned cold. "Boss Mao, are you suspecting that we did something?" Mao San said calmly, "Didn't something happen? I lost a brother, so I have to investigate." Shao Qing sneered, "I was the one who told you that there are mosquitoes in the jungle and they bite people. It's your people who didn't take precautions. What does it have to do with us? The reason why I asked is that you two have been in the jungle for a long time. You are more familiar with everything than me. It's naturally easier for you to do something. Of course, I'm not saying that you two did something. It's just an example." Mao San said with a fake smile, "Now it seems that you two didn't do anything. But you two must have a way to resist or prevent those insects from getting close to you." Yen Qiue also replied with a fake smile, "It's really a coincidence that we weren't bitten. We either did something or have a way to resist the insects." "Boss Mao is so sure, but why don't I know about it?" Mao San said with a gloomy face, "It's fine if you two don't want to say it. I don't want to force you. I just don't want any more brothers to die for no reason." Chapter 155. Shao Qing faintly said, "We once encountered a kind of white spider in the jungle and were bitten by it. This kind of spider is the natural enemy of many insects in the jungle. Our blood still has a bit of the spider smell, so no insects will bite me." "I see." Mao San was a little disappointed, but he didn't know that Shao Qing was just making things up. She didn't encounter any white spiders, and even if she did, what kind of spider could get close to her and bite her? They had just entered the forest and lost one of their brothers. The morale of Mao San's team was a little low. Mao San gave them a speech to encourage them, and everyone went on their way. Yen Qiue, who was leading the way, winked at Xiao Qing with a teasing look on her face. How could a mosquito bite a person to death? Unless there were dozens or hundreds of them biting the same person. Yen Qiue was the one who did it behind the scenes. If someone were to come and dissect the buried corpse, they would find that his internal organs had been shattered. Yen Qiue controlled the air and crushed most of his internal organs. However, Mao San did not suspect this, so he did not do a deep examination. As they continued to move forward, Xiao Qing quietly planted the seeds of daughter in several people's bodies. She wanted to slowly cripple Mao San's helpers, and then kill him. It was not that she was cruel and wanted to cripple Mao San's helpers one by one, and then let him die in endless fear. If she did not do it, she and Yen Qiue would be injured. Of course, Xiao Qing was sure that Yen Qiue was thinking of the above. He wanted to torture Mao San a few more times. The second person who died soon appeared, because they encountered danger the next day. Xiao Qing made up a type of spider, and they really encountered it. The spider was the size of a fist, and its whole body was white. Only the hair on its claws was black. The silk it spat out formed a web, and some of the web had white bones. Although it was only a piece of bone, it was certain that it was a human leg bone. Even humans had become its food. It could be seen how cruel this spider was. What was even more frightening was that when it encountered an enemy, the large spider would instantly discharge a pile of small red spiders from its lower body. The color of the small spiders was as bright as blood, and it was obvious that they were highly poisonous. At first, it was one of Mao San's men who discovered it. He went behind a tree to relieve himself. Just as he undid his belt, a white jade-like spider suddenly appeared in front of him. Before he could react, his face was covered in spider silk. Then, he felt a sharp pain on his neck and could not get up again. Mao San waited for a long time and didn't see him return, so he sent people to look for him. Then, he saw that the man's body was densely covered with hundreds of spiders. In just a short while, the man's flesh was sucked clean, leaving only skin and bones. He looked like a skeleton. The person who was sent to look for him was frightened. He turned around and wanted to run, but a group of spiders followed behind him. These spiders were very fast, and the person who was chasing after them shouted for his mother as he ran. When Mao San and the others heard his cries, they knew that something bad had happened. They released their supernatural powers and raised their weapons. They were instantly on alert. Then, they saw a row of white spiders behind the man's butt. A kid with a gun tried to shoot a spider in the stomach. With a bang, the spider burst out with green blood and lay there motionless. Before he could rejoice, a bunch of small red spiders crawled out of the dead spider's stomach. Chapter 156. The little red spiders were even faster than the white ones. They caught up with the man in the blink of an eye. One of them climbed onto his ankle and bit him. The man screamed and fell down. The rest of the spiders swarmed over and sucked out another man's jerky. Mao III felt a chill seep into his bones. He roared, "Grab your weapons. Don't let this thing get close to you. Fire paranormals. Go first." A fire ability user was the first to release a wall of fire. The wall of fire was indeed very useful against the white spiders. Once the white spiders touched the wall of fire, they would be instantly burned to death. Then, they would release countless small red spiders. These small spiders weren't afraid of the wall of fire at all. As soon as they were released, they would lie on the wall of fire. Crunch, crunch, crunch. In just a short time, they had eaten the wall of fire. The situation was very clear now. The white spiders were not terrible. The red spiders were terrible. The wall of fire killed many of the white spiders and released many smaller ones. Mao III felt his legs go soft. He quickly asked Xiao Qing, "Haven't you seen these spiders before? What's their weakness?" Xiao Qing was stunned for a moment. Everything she said before was made up by her. She had never seen these spiders before. On the other hand, Yen Qiue, the know-it-all, had a rough idea of what was going on. He quickly said, "These white spiders are especially fragile. The best way to kill them is to do what the brother just did and use a wall of fire to kill them. As for those red spiders, they can eat elements. You must use something solid to kill them. However, don't get too close to them because they are highly poisonous. Yen Qiue didn't want to kill Mao III and his men, but if they were all dead, who would kill the spiders? When Mao Laosan heard this, he immediately organized his brothers who had natural abilities to attack. Fire walls, water balls, wind blades, earth spikes, everything that one could think of. When the white spiders were almost killed, it was time for the wood and metal paranormals to act. As for those strength and speed paranormals, they could only hold small pistols and fire bullets from behind. They didn't dare to go up, because once they were bitten and poisoned, they would lose their lives. After a long time, they finally cleared out all the small spiders. Other than the 2 people who died at the beginning, there was also a pitiful person. Because he was standing too close to the front, he was poisoned to death by a small spider that broke through his defenses. Another 3 people died at once. The veins on old Mao's forehead popped out. He was so angry that he was about to stomp his feet. If they continued to die like this, they would all die before they could find anything. Without saying anything, Mao Laosan pointed his gun at Xiao Qing. Why didn't you tell me earlier that you knew about this spider's weakness? Are we late? Xiao Qing said coldly. Mao Laosan, you should have a conscience. We told you the news as soon as we realized it. If it weren't for the 2 of us, you and your team would have suffered a great loss. Mao Laosan's face turned red. He had to admit that Xiao Qing was telling the truth. After a long time, he said coldly, "Let's go." As soon as he took a step, Yen Qiue said lazily, "Let's change our route and take a detour." Why? Mao Laosan turned his head and looked at Yen Qiue fiercely. He looked like he would tear Yen Qiue apart if she didn't tell him the reason. Yen Qiue smiled and said, "These spiders live in groups. They are like ants and have a spider queen. This spider queen doesn't need to come out to hunt and is only responsible for producing offspring. It spits out a kind of white silk that is poisonous and extremely sticky. As long as you touch it, you won't be able to survive. But after this silk is processed, it can be woven into clothes that are invulnerable. There are a lot of spiders around the spider queen." Chapter 157. When he heard the words invulnerable, greed flashed through third brother Mao's eyes. However, he knew his own limits. He knew that even if his group had a chance to take down the Spider Queen, they would definitely suffer heavy casualties. Their target this time wasn't the Spider Queen, so it was best not to be greedy. Detour. Hearing Mao III's words, Yen Qiue was actually a little disappointed. He really wanted to kill the Spider Queen and get some of that spider silk to weave a small vest for his wife to protect her. He and Xiao Qing could definitely take down the Spider Queen, but if they could trick Mao III into leading his men, they would be able to exhaust Mao III's strength and get the spider silk. It was simply killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Yen Qiue secretly noted the location and prepared to get the spider silk when he returned after killing Mao III. The detour was a little far. That night, they chopped down a few nearby trees and cleared out an empty space for them to rest. The next day, another person died as expected. This person had died without a sound. There was not even a single wound on his body. Mao III's eyes turned red from anger as he thought about the number of casualties. He said coldly, "The last one was bitten to death by a mosquito. What about this one? Don't tell me he was bitten to death by a fly." Yen Qiue went forward to take a look and said, "He was poisoned to death. Look at his neck. Is there a red line?" Mao San lifted the chin of the corpse and as expected, he saw a red line at the position of the main artery. However, Mao III still couldn't believe it. Impossible. Everyone slept together at night. How could he be poisoned for no reason? Yen Qiue rubbed his chin and said, "He was poisoned by food." Mao III laughed when he heard Yen Qiue's words. He pointed at his face and said, "Do I look stupid to you?" Yen Qiue wanted to say yes, but he didn't in the end and shook his head. Mao III gritted his teeth and said, "If you don't, Then why are you trying to trick me? At night, everyone eats the same thing. Why is it that we're all fine, but he's poisoned? Yen Chiue didn't answer Mao San. Instead, she called someone who was familiar with the deceased and asked him, did he eat anything other than dinner tonight? That person thought hard and then said, yes. He picked a few red fruits that looked like cherry tomatoes by the roadside. He said they were wild cherry tomatoes and he wanted to eat them after meals. He even asked me to eat them, but I was afraid something would happen, so I didn't eat them. I even tried to persuade him, but he wouldn't listen. He insisted that his family used to live in the mountains and had eaten these fruits many times. They weren't poisonous. Yen Chiue smiled and said, that's right, it's not a wild cherry tomato, it's a poisonous fruit. But it's not fatal. But he ate a lot of mushrooms that we picked last night. This fruit can't be eaten together with mushrooms. It's just like how you can't eat persimmons after drinking mutton soup, or how you can't eat lemons with prawns. So he died. What Yen Chiue said was reasonable. No matter how angry Mao San was, he could not vent it on Yen Chiue. With a dark face, he reprimanded everyone. Do you know that we are in the forest? In the forest. Don't eat whatever you want just because you have some skills. No one will care if you die. Yen Chiue smiled but didn't say anything. He pulled Xiao Qing along and followed the group. He didn't show much expression on his face, but he was secretly feeling good. He had made up the story about the poisonous fruit not being able to be eaten with a mushroom because it was indeed a wild cherry tomato fruit. He saw the man eat the wild cherry tomato with his own eyes, so he killed him. Even the red line on the man's neck was actually an allergic reaction. However, he was the only one here who knew about medicine, so he lied to them. The real cause of the man's death was that his heart was crushed by daughter. However, Mao San didn't expect that Xiao Qing could kill him secretly, so he didn't notice it until now. So far, there were only 9 of them left, including Mao San. Even if they turned against each other now, Xiao Qing was confident that she could kill them all. However, even a lion needed to use all its strength to catch a rabbit, not to mention that they were not rabbits. Since they had already entered the forest, Xiao Qing didn't mind staying here for a few more days. It was better to accompany them to find what they were looking for, and then kill them secretly to reduce their pressure. When they arrived at the river, there were only 6 of them left. Mao San almost became a frightened bird. Luckily, they had already arrived at the river. The river was very long, and it seemed to cross the entire forest. They still needed to find the wettest place along the river. It was definitely more dangerous by the river than other places, so everyone, including Xiao Qing, was vigilant. Xiao Qing was vigilant because they had already gone through a lot, and they didn't want to fail at such an easy task. As for Mao III, his men had died mysteriously. Up until now, more than half of his men had died. He couldn't allow any more deaths. Otherwise, they wouldn't even have the chance to leave the forest. Therefore, they were especially vigilant. They didn't know whether it was because they had been unlucky for so long, but after walking along the river for a whole day, they finally found what Mao San was looking for. When he saw the crooked, umbrella-like tree, he resisted the urge to cheer. Instead, he looked at it with a fervent gaze. After so many people died, they finally found it. Xiao Qing and Yen Chiue looked at each other. They had been patient for so long, and now they could finally take action. Chapter 158. The tree really looked like a crooked umbrella. Even the branches and leaves were dense and fluffy like a canopy. However, the trunk was too crooked and looked like a screw. Within 15 meters of the tree, not a single blade of grass grew. There was only a dark green vine that clung to the tree. The leaves were shaped like sharp blades, and there were a few red flowers the size of a fist that bloomed sporadically. The petals were golden and looked like flowing liquid. Among them, there were 2 green fruits the size of a fingernail that hung on the vine in the shape of water droplets. Xiao Qing noticed and Mao San's eyes immediately lit up. He quickly walked forward but stopped after 2 steps. There were dangers everywhere in the forest, especially around the important plants. There were definitely mutated beasts guarding them. Perhaps the plants themselves were very dangerous. Mao San did not dare to be careless. If he failed at the last step and even lost his life, wouldn't that be an unjust death? He called one of his subordinates over and let him go forward to test the waters. The subordinate was very brave and walked forward cautiously until he reached the bottom of the tree. There was no danger. The lackey turned around and looked at third brother Mao. Third brother Mao immediately signaled for him to pick the fruit. The lackey nodded and stretched out his hand. Before his fingertips could touch the fruit, he screamed and fell to his knees. The rest of the people looked carefully and saw a palm-sized scorpion on the ground. Its stinger had already pierced through the lackey's shoe and into his flesh. The subordinate twitched on the ground and his skin slowly turned green. After a while, it returned to its normal color and lay on the ground motionless. The others didn't dare to approach. A smart person picked up a stone and threw it over. When the stone hit the underling, his body was like a balloon that had been filled with water. With a pop, a hole appeared in his body. Pus and blood flowed out. In just a few seconds, there was only a pool of pus and a piece of skin left on the ground. The rest of the people's faces turned green. What kind of poison was this? It could melt a person's bones and organs into pus and blood in an instant. Old Mao San gritted his teeth and threw out a wind blade. The wind blade easily cut the scorpion on the ground into two halves. If they looked carefully, they would find that the scorpion came out from the ground. Mao III was smart this time. He asked the Earth Paranormals to harden the ground, and then he led the others to walk over carefully. The group of people slowly approached the big tree. Xiao Qing and Yen Chue stood behind them and didn't move. Xiao Qing and Yen Chue were not. What Xiao Qing and Yen Chue needed to do now was to stand there and wait until Xiao Qing's men were almost all dead. Then, they would go and pick up the spoils. Just as Xiao Qing and the others expected, as soon as the group approached the tree, countless vines ignored the hardened ground and drilled out of the ground. When they drilled out, a group of scorpions came out with them. Those scorpions saw people and jumped on them. Mao III could cut a piece of them with a wind blade, but there were too many scorpions. They drilled out of the ground in a dense way. With the vines harassing them, it was inevitable that some people would be stung by their tails. Anyone who was stung by the scorpion's tail would turn into a puddle of blood and pus within a minute. It had to be said that the scorpion had no attack power other than its venom. However, its venom was incurable. There was probably medicine that could save them, but those who were poisoned had no chance to take it. Speed-type and speed-type paranormals had it the worst. Those nature-type paranormals could cover themselves with earth and fire shields, but those who specialized in physical evolution could only scurry away like rats. You're tuning in to the Narrate and Escape YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.